This is the Y Search workshop for your birth origins and or your sons and daughters. We'd like to welcome you to this workshop. My name is Grace Saranti, and I'm an adoptee and an adoptive parent and a professional. However, I do not deal in adoption work in my profession. Becky Patras is the birth mother who's going to be giving that view of this workshop a little later in this session. And we would like to kind of get a feel for who's in the audience. So could I see a show of hands for how many adoptees are here? And how many birth parents? And how many adoptive parents? And professionals? Okay. Those of you who are professionals, did you also raise your hand as a member of the triad? Okay, 2 of you. Okay. I thought maybe we'd have more professionals who were members of the triad, so I had prepared this little speech. So I'm going to kind of put that aside and just say kind of what Becky and I feel about professionals in this workshop. We're glad you're here, but we want you, if you're a triad member, to kind of put your professional side aside and look at it as an adoptee or birth parent, whichever you are, because this isn't a clinical workshop. So I hope you who are not a member of the triad is going to get out of it what you're seeking. Although we might touch on a few statistics, that's not what this workshop is designed for, and we are going to do it more on a personal level to try and identify the reasons of search and some of the problems and what to look for. So I hope that's why you're in this workshop. This workshop, as I said, will attempt to identify and discuss why we search, with some emphasis on the actual search, but not telling you how to search. How many people here are just beginning a search? Okay, or thinking about starting a search? And how many have completed a search? Okay, and how many are in the process of search? Okay, so we have a little bit of everybody in here. That's good. And we're going to talk a little bit about reunions and post-reunions, reunion relationships, simply on how they relate back to the search and why you're searching in the first place. So we're going to touch on that a little bit because I think it's real important to talk about what happens, not just at the reunion or right after it, but maybe 2 or 3 or 5 years later that relate back to if you're getting what you were looking for to begin with. Okay, as an adoptee, and this is how I'm looking at why are we searching, I think that adoptees have a thirst for knowledge. I think that's the one major important thing in our lives. We grow up in families where there's no physical similarities generally, and here again, you know, I know some of you are going to say, no, that's not true, or yes, it is, and I'm talking in generalities here because there's no way for me to just separate it and say, you know, this is the absolute. So generally, we grow up in families where there are no similarities, and because we're missing this ability to identify with the people we're growing up with, we have this thirst for knowledge of who we look like and who we act like and about our past in general. So there we've identified 2 things. We're looking for an identity and similarities. We also have a need to know the missing who, what, where, when, why, and how. And I think that really categorizes it all into one big major, you know, why are we searching? There are so many missing pieces, and a lot of times we don't see them all as an adolescent or as a child, and sometimes not as a young adult. We don't see them until later in our lives, and then it becomes important to us why we have to know these things. These are questions that people born into a family often take for granted and often ask us as adoptees, well, why is that so important to you? And they just don't seem to understand why it's important. Last week I did a TV interview for a talk show, and I said to the host, I said, well, because you know who you look like and and I went through my list. I said, you know who you look like, who you act like, who you talk like, and you know, she had this shocked look on her face like I wasn't going to shut up, and I wasn't. And you know, I was going to get my point across, and I said, and we don't have that, you know, and I said, isn't it important to you, for you to know where did you get your ability to be a talk show host, and why is this your interest? I said, we have none of that. We can take on our attitudes of our adoptive family. I said, but the only thing they can really give us is their morals and their religious beliefs, and we kind of grow into that mold. I said, but they can't give us the personality and who we look like, and we can't look at them and say, oh, my nose is just like my dad's, And I said, you can do that. You can look at aunts and uncles and cousins, and you know everything about yourself and where you came from. And, after her shock disappeared from her face, she said, well, I guess I never looked at it that way. She said, I just never understood why the identity is such a big thing. Why do you have to have that, missing identity satisfied? So, if we can reach one person, and I'm sure maybe people that watched that TV show then got the same impression, but I felt like if I could reach one person in the media and make them think about it, well, then maybe they'd say something to someone else and get the point across. So it is an important part of our lives, is the missing identity. And I think we don't often realize that at until certain stages of our lives. We come to realize that our adoptive families have given us their morals and religious beliefs, and I think as adoptees, we try very hard to want to look like them or try to find a similarity in our looks with our adoptive families because we don't want to be different, and we know we are. And that's a societal attitude that tells us that we are different and we're set apart from everyone else. And whether we've had positive or negative feelings through our lives as being adoptees, we're still different. And although we want to be individuals, no one likes to be set aside and categorized as being the different person in the group. So I think that we try very hard to take on the personalities of our adoptive families, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But we wonder throughout our lives why we like or dislike certain things, or what in our personalities, why we have a certain personality, or why we have reached our goals and achievements, because although sometimes it may look like we're taking these on from our adoptive families, it's hard to realize that maybe we're exactly like a birth mother or a father and doing the same profession or career or what have you that they have done. And I think this is what we call our sense of self. And I think we don't have that until we decide to search and we complete our search. And for those of you who have completed a search who are adoptees, and I can't speak as a birth mother because I don't know if you feel that same thing, I think for me anyway, that was the biggest thing, was to finally look at these people who not only looked like me, but who sounded just like me. I think was the most amazing thing. When I called one of my eldest sister who lives in Arizona, and I had seen a picture of her and everybody said, oh, you look just like twins, and I didn't see it, when I saw the picture, and I thought, oh, well, they see something I don't. But when she answered the phone and I heard her talking to me, I couldn't talk because I was hearing myself, and it just appalled me, And I thought, my God, when you first hear yourself on a tape recorder, and you don't like the way you hear, and what you sound like, and I was listening to this person who sounded exactly like I knew my voice sounded on a tape recorder, and I just couldn't speak to her, and she was just going on and on and on, and it was starting to upset me because that had never happened. And I had talked to other brothers and sisters that I had found, and of course I didn't hear that in their voices, so it never dawned on me that I would talk to someone on the phone and hear myself. And it was just to add this little story briefly, it was funny, her 7-year-old son, as I said, they live in Arizona, and when I first talked to him, it was about a month later, and he was very excited. He kept wanting to talk to his new aunt. And so we finally made arrangements when we'd both be home and so he could call me. And when he did call me and I answered, he wouldn't talk to me. And I had to kind of laugh because I was remembering how I wouldn't talk to his mother. And I kept saying, Gordon, what's the matter? It's Aunt Grace. And I could hear her on the other end going, what's wrong with you? This is a long-distance phone call. Why won't you talk to her? And I could hear him on the phone, and she told me then later that he stopped and he looked at her, and he said, how did you do that? And as I said, I could hear him, and she said, how did I do what? And he said, well, how are you doing that? How are you talking on the phone and talking to me right here? And he could not understand the concept that this was a different person on the phone who sounded just like his mother. Well, when I sent a picture of myself to them, it was a picture of me and my husband. And his next question was, well, how are you doing that? How are you talking on the phone and talking to me right here? And he could not understand the concept that this was a different person on the phone who sounded just like his mother. Well, when I sent a picture of myself to them, it was a picture of me and my husband. And well, Mom, who is that man with you in that picture, and when did you take that picture, and how come I never saw him before? And she kept trying to explain to him that that was not her, and he would not believe this. You know, he kept thinking she was joking and trying to trick him, as a 7-year-old, you know, thinks his mother's trying to do. And this went on for a long time, and I still have not met her or this nephew, but this went on for, I think, almost a year, when he would look at this picture, and he would say, well, tell me who that man is again in that picture with you. And she had to constantly remind him that that was not her in that picture. So as I said, I had to laugh at that because I felt the same way looking at her and talking to her. So I think that's a real important part for us as an adoptee, is finally gaining that sense of self. We finally know who we look like, and thank you, and who we act like, and we finally see that although we were taught that it was environment that was making us the way we were, and of course we all know that that's not true, I often joke in my family about the fact that I did my master's thesis on heredity. And I wrote my thesis that it was environmental, and this was several years ago. And I often joke that at my job also that I really have no business being there or having that degree, because it is really a falsehood that I wrote my thesis on this. And although I think environment does play a part in our lives and in what we are, I think it is a very small percentage. I do see a lot of dissimilarities in myself with my birth siblings, and I have 7 of them, and we're all full sibs, so we should be more alike, but I do think that the environmental conditions do play a lot in it, because we grew up completely different. They grew up welfare kids, and very poor side of Chicago. I don't know if you're familiar with the Chicago, but Cabrini Green area, very rough area, and I grew up in a suburb, and not a rich family, but comfortably upper middle class family, and had everything, and went to private schools. And so there are a lot of things that are not similar about us, but I think these are environmental things, and when I look beyond that, I see the similarities. So I do think that the environment does play a part in that, but I think when we gain this sense of self, that we finally see that what the percentage is, or what outweighs what we see, that the environment isn't the big deal that everyone told us all these years that it was in our lives. And so there again, I think this leads us to another thing, motivation for search, is our heritage. We want to know who we look like and where we come from and what our nationalities are. And although some of us have that from birth, and in some cases it is true, we find a lot of cases it's not true what you were told. I think more than not, you find that you have the wrong nationality. You thought you were Polish all your life, and you find out you're German or Jewish or whatever. But for those of us who did grow up knowing what we were, and I did, and I think I'm one of the lucky ones in that case, I didn't have such a hard time when I found my family, because I did fit right in. I could go from one family to the other, and it was very similar, except for our environmental growing conditions. So I think when we find that, it gives us another thing we're motivated to search for, is a sense of direction. And I don't think you can get that sense of direction until you do the search. I think that as an adoptee, and here again, I'm being very general, and you may not agree with me, but I think that we look for a sense of direction all our lives, and maybe we don't know that we do. For years, I didn't really care about searching, and I honestly don't think I was in denial, which we hear a lot about. And I think a lot of adoptees that say I don't care about searching are in denial. I don't honestly think I was ever at that stage of denial that I didn't think I needed this, or I didn't need my birth family, but I was very comfortable in my life. I had a lot going on. It was during college that most of my friends said, don't you want to search, and I kept saying, and they wanted to, for me. And no, I wasn't interested at that point in my life. It was the first time I was away from home, and I wanted to party. I didn't want to search. So, and I did. But it was funny because where I went to school, I found that at the time I was in college, that my birth mother was the librarian at the public library on our campus. And we used to go into a restaurant, and they would call me Mary Lou. They'd say, hi, Mary Lou, how you doing? I'd say, well, my name's not Mary Lou. And they'd laugh at me. They'd say, well, we know you haven't been here for a month or two, but we know who you are. And boy, these people are crazy, And that's what got my friends interested in a search, because they all knew I was adopted, and they said, that must be your birth family. Your birth family must be here. And yeah, whatever, Well, 10 years later, when I did my search, I come to find out that my two younger brothers were on the same campus in grade school that I was on college, and that my grandmother lived like a block away from me, and that we were all right there. And not only that, but during my childhood, my great-grandparents lived like a mile from us all my life. So I think we were passing constantly and just never knowing it. In fact, one of my brothers, who had a very strong reputation for running around and picking women up, got very upset and said, well, we found out we hung out in the same bars at college, and he was not in college, he was in the service. And he said, well, did I ever try and pick you up? He was very upset about this, And he said, did I ever ask you out? And if we went out, did I try anything? And so, of course, I lied and said yes, and I remember the whole thing. It was a very traumatic experience in my life. This upset him for months, but it wasn't true. And this was done because he is the funny person in the family and always tricking everyone else, so I thought it was a good opportunity to trick him. But it was funny because in comparison, we did find out we did hang out in the same places, and as I said, we're on the same campus, and we're constantly around each other and just never knew it. My sister, Mary Lou, by the way, is the one in Arizona, and she said that it was real funny because she lived on the south side of Chicago, which is where I lived, but I was in school at DePaul on the north side, and I was living on campus, and she said that she would go from the south side up there to this restaurant where she hung out with some of her friends, and then she'd go back home and they'd say something to her like they had just seen her somewhere else, and how could she have done that because it was just an hour before or something, and they wondered how she could get across town like that. And she thought they were crazy. So we were doing this constantly for several years in our lives. But I'm getting off the track a little bit here, talking about sense of direction. I think that all of a sudden that comes together for us. And when you think about this sense of direction, and you think that you have direction in your lives, all of a sudden when you do your search, you find out you don't have the direction in your lives that you thought you did. And I always thought I was a very self-confident person, and boy, was that shot down when I started my search, and I found out the low self-esteem I really had, and the sense of who was I and where was I, and I wasn't anybody I thought I was. And so I think it's real important to gain that sense of direction, and that you can only gain it through a search. And that leads us to another motivation of when you get that sense of direction, you have the missing pieces. And of course, most of us know that the missing pieces is what it's all about, because you can't have direction and you can't be a whole person until all those pieces are there. A couple other motivations that I think are real important are medical histories. And when I do some speaking around Chicago, I often speak about medical histories because I was a sick child when my adoptive parents got me. And not right off, but a couple months after they got me, a lot of illnesses became evident. And from about the age of 3 to 33, I had several bouts with cancer, and I had several blood disorders that were very life-threatening. And it wasn't until I was 33 that a doctor that was treating me was so appalled when he found out I was adopted that we had never got records open and that I had lived this way all my life. And he had diagnosed the blood disease as a hereditary disease, and no one had ever taken the time to really do that. And without the medical history, he said, he couldn't be certain, but it just seemed to him like this is what it was. And I can remember as a child going to doctors constantly, and I don't hold this against my adoptive parents because I think I was born in 1950, so I was adopted during a time where I think a lot of adoptive parents were ignorant to the adoption laws and what could be done. My parents, I think, are very honest when they say they never knew they could petition a court and get my file open, and I do believe that. I really think they never knew that. I didn't know that for a long time until I got involved in the adoption movement. But I can remember as a child, that when I would be at a doctor's office, and it was so traumatic for me, and my parents never knew this, but it stayed with me, and it would upset me for a long time because I remember very vividly the doctor asking them about medical histories, and they'd say, well, she's adopted, and the doctor, I can remember, would close the file and say, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. And, that was something that stayed with me all of my life, and so I was sick all the time. But it was something I was accustomed to. It was a way of life for me. When you're a sick child and you grow into a sick adult, it's just something you learn to live with. So I am an activist for medical histories, but I am also a person who was in denial at the stage of my search where, of course, that was the reason I was searching, was for my medical history, and because I had a blood disease that was very serious. And of course, after I completed my search, I didn't even get medical history for like 2 years. I didn't even care about it. So when I hear adoptees tell me that is the only reason I want to search, I really get a little upset with them, and I tell them, no, it's not. You know, you're saying that to protect your parents and protect yourself, but that's not why you're searching, and I, of all people, feel I have the right to say that. Another thing I think we're really looking for in this search is genetic connectiveness. We have no one in our lives that we can connect with. We can say we're connecting with our adoptive families, and here again I was very lucky that I was one of the children placed in a family of similarities when they were matching families. And I do look like my adoptive father and his family, and I act like them. And so, as I said, when I wrote my thesis, I thought, well, it must be environmental because I look like them and I act like them. It is, you know, part of the environment. It has nothing to do with my heritage. So, I was very lucky in that fact, and I think that that was one of the contributing factors to why I didn't care about searching until much later in my life. It wasn't until I started getting more involved in the adoption movement and hearing from other people what they felt they were missing in their lives that it started dawning on me that some things I thought maybe were a little abnormal in my life really were issues of adoption, and I really never associated them with being issues of adoption before. So I think we're really looking for that genetic connectiveness because we have to find someone that we are like. And I think that's an important part of our lives, to have somebody in our life that we can connect to. And that connectiveness is never quite there with someone you're not related to. I think there's a desire in some adoptees to let their birth parents know that they're okay, that they're happy with their adoption, that they grew up in a well-maintained home, a good family. I never felt that way, and when I was, you know, getting my presentation ready, a lot of adoptees that I talked to told me this, and in fact, I talked to Becky about it. I said, have you ever heard people tell you this before? I said, it just amazes me that this is a reason they want to search, because I never felt like I wanted to get my birth mother so I could tell her, oh, I had a wonderful life, and, you know, I said, to me, that's almost like slapping her, you know, and saying, well, you know, I knew you couldn't give it to me, and I'm just going to really boast here about this great life I had. So it was kind of confusing to me, but I guess a lot of adoptees do feel this. So I did want to include it, although I don't agree with it. I think it's, you know, these aren't just my opinions, and to be fair, I want to include what some reasons are maybe to search that I don't agree with. I think there's a great need for those adoptees who adoptive parents are deceased. I find a lot of that with people I work with, that once their adoptive families are deceased, that then they search. I personally think as a professional that this can be a very dangerous thing to do. It's a very dangerous reason to search. And the people, as I said, I don't do adoption work in my profession, but I do have some people that come to me that know me well that I work with on adoption. And I think it's very dangerous because you're not prepared to search, and you haven't done the preparation for search and for rejection and for the things you might find and everything that goes with search, and all you're looking for is another family because you were close to your family and it's gone and you want another one. So I really discourage adoptees from searching if their adoptive parents have recently died, or even if it's not recent, but that's the only reason they can give me for wanting to search. For some adoptees, I think it's the great motivation is the need to end the secrecy and the lies. I never felt I was lied to through my adoption. My parents honestly told me everything they knew, which I grew up knowing that I came from a married birth family that was very poor, and I was told I was the fifth of 5 children and they couldn't afford to keep me. Well, for the most part, that was true. I was quite surprised when I found out I came from a family of 8 children and wondered what happened to all those other children. And it was upsetting to me to find out I had younger full brothers and sisters, because then I wondered, well, why couldn't they keep me in the middle? What was wrong with me? They knew I was sick, and that's why they didn't keep me. Well, you know, that was a little fantasy of mine, a very negative one, and it wasn't true at all. It was a case where there was abuse in the home, and it was during a time when it was an on-again, off-again relationship. So I also found out I had another brother who was relinquished. So 6 of my brothers and sisters did grow up together with my birth parents, and 2 of us were given up for adoption, the 2 in the middle. So it was at a stage where my birth mother felt that the abuse was so bad she wasn't bringing more children home. And obviously in this on-again, off-again relationship, she got pregnant every time it was an on-again relationship. So, so that was the reason for the relinquishments, because my younger brothers are like 6 and 7 years younger than me, so there was quite a period of time there they were separated for a long time and then got back together, and again there were 2 more children just a year apart. And I think it took her all that time to realize this relationship wasn't going anywhere, and they did finally divorce. But I think for a lot of adoptees, as I said, that need to end that secrecy. And I don't connect with that a lot. I hear it from other people, but because I didn't experience it, I don't connect with that a lot. But I understand that they've been lied to all of their lives. And I find this to be more true than not, that a lot of adoptees have more lies about their adoption than they have truths. I guess I always thought everybody had information like I did and had adoption papers with names on them. And my gosh, when I got in the adoption movement, people found out I all my life had my adoption papers with my birth parents' names on it and never searched for them. They were appalled. But like I said, if you're not ready to search, you're not going to search. And if you don't feel you have a need to search, you're not going to start a search. So I do want to touch on a few reasons why we prolong a decision to search. Since I told you the reasons why I think we do search, I think these are reasons why people don't search or just prolong the start of the search. The first one we talked a little bit about is denial. I have an adopted sister that I grew up with, and she's 4 years older than me, and she swears she has no interest in ever searching. But when I look at her, and I know that this is not a normal attitude, of course, now since I've been involved in the adoption movement, I see all the problems that she's had all of her life with never fitting in to the family, and being the redheaded Irish child who was not matched to our family, and who always heard everyone say, "This one looks just like you people, but where'd you get that one?" You know, and I think, my God, you know, we ruined this girl, you know, as a family. You know, she grew up hearing these things. Well, of course she doesn't want to look for a birth family. Why would she want double rejection? You know, she lived with it all of her life. And there again, I don't think any of the family did it to her on purpose. I think it was ignorance on the part of people adopting in the 40s and 50s, that they weren't told these things, you know, and they weren't told your child's going to have problems. They were told, you know, take this kid home, it's going to be just like you, it's going to grow up just like you, and there's never going to be a problem. Well, you know, we all know that's not true. So I think the denial is a big part of it. Again, with that, I think fear is a part of it. We're afraid of rejection. Some of us feel that we've been rejected once by being relinquished, and so we think, well, why try it again? You know, maybe we'll be rejected again. We're worried about the attitudes of society. You know, we're taught to be the good little adoptee, so we don't want to rock the boat, and, you know, we don't want society to question us, and some of us are not strong or bold like me, you know, for when someone says, well, why are you doing that? And my father-in-law, when I started my search, said, how can you hurt your parents like that? You know, and of course, like I said, being a bold person, I told him off. So, you know, and told him, well, I'm not hurting my parents, and if they're hurt, I'm sorry, but you know, they're understanding what I'm doing here. So I think society plays a big part in why we don't search. Family attitudes also play a big part. If your adoptive family is not supportive and you are trying to be the, quote, good adoptee, then you're not going to search, or you're going to do it secretly. And that's a whole nother issue that I'm going to talk a little bit about after I finish this. The other thing, I think the big thing is loyalty. You know, we've grown up to be very loyal to these people that took us in as infants. We know they're not our real parents, but they are our parents, and we're not going to hurt them. In most cases, they're much, much older than we are, not the normal age of what parents should be. And, you know, there's always an excuse. When I started my search, my adoptive mother was like 75, so 74, 75. So by all means, she was much older, and you know, if I was going to kill the woman, you know, I would have to think, well, at this age, this is going to do it. Well, my parents were pretty supportive, so I didn't have to worry about that. But I think the loyalty is a big issue, and I think because of that, a lot of adoptees do search secretively. And that brings me to the next issue. As adoptees, I think we have some responsibilities if we're going to search. Let me look at my time here. I'm getting real mouthy here, and I don't want to cut Becky out. I think we have some responsibilities that we have to look at if you're contemplating a search. And if you don't do these things, then you're not being a responsible person. You have to look at, number one, when I hear an adoptee tell me, I'm searching, but I'm not telling my adoptive family because I don't want to hurt them. They're sick. They're old. They'd never, I want to protect them. They've been so good to me. Well, these are the same things that we are in the movement have been aggravated about all these years because people have lied to us. But as adoptees, we turn right around and justify why we're lying to our adoptive families. And we're not going to tell them, but we're in support groups and we're telling the whole world anyway, but we're going to protect our families because they've been so good to us. Or for whatever reason, they'll never understand or they'll disown me. Well, that's a chance you have to take, and that's a responsibility, in my opinion, that you have to live with if you're going to search, because that's what the movement is about, and it's about the lies and the closed records, and that's one of the first things we have to stop. And as adoptees, we have that responsibility, and we have that opportunity to stop those lies. If you're going to search, then I think you need to look at all these things, and you need to be able to say, am I able to tell my adoptive parents I want to do this, and can I tell them I need this information, it's my right and I need to do it. I'm sorry if it hurts you. I'll try and work with you on this. It's something new and scary for me too. But I think that's one of the big issues for me anyway, that we have to stop the lies, and as adoptees we can do it first. And if we expect the agencies and the birth parents and the adoptive parents to stop doing it to us, then we can take the first initiative to stop doing it to them. I think some of the other things that we have to look at if we're going to search, we have to examine the reasons behind. We have to ask ourselves, why am I doing this search? And I think you have to be prepared to answer those questions very honestly. And if you can't do it with another person, do it by yourself. And if you can't do it by yourself, get someone you're close to talk to about it and to help you figure it out. But you have to ask yourself, why am I searching? If you're searching because your parents just died, as I said, that's a very dangerous reason. It gets into a lot of other mental health issues that can be very detrimental to you, surrounding your adoption and just your life in general. Okay, so once you identify why you want to search, I think you have to ask yourself, am I ready to accept what I find? What am I looking for? And am I prepared to reject or be rejected? When I searched, everyone talked about rejection. And since I never really thought I experienced that in my life, I always had a lot of friends and really never thought too much of... Oh, sure. Are you ready to accept what you find? What am I looking for? Am I prepared to reject or be rejected? I have more, but I want to put this thing in about the rejection. I think we have, as adoptees, have to look at, maybe I'm the one who's going to reject. I never looked at that. I never thought that was a possibility. And it wasn't until after I found my birth family and I started seeing some pretty strange people that I just couldn't connect with, and I thought, oh my gosh, what if they want this relationship with me, and I've got to introduce these people to everybody, and maybe I'm not ready for this. It's something that I never looked at because no one ever told me in the group I was in that this was a possibility. When I started out, I was in a very small group of maybe about, which I guess talking to other people at this conference, this isn't a small group. I'm with Truth Seekers now, and we have approximately 100 people at meetings, so I was in a group of maybe like 20, 25 people for about 2 years. And I sat in that group for 2 years and never searched because I wasn't ready to. I had never in my life known a birth mother, and I was just amazed. I sat there and listened to these stories, and I thought, wow, I just couldn't believe this happened, that people felt this way, that these were the reasons people gave babies up. I just couldn't understand why anybody would give a baby up. And I guess growing up in a very Italian ethnic family, where it wasn't done in my family, if someone had a child, the family took care of them. That I just didn't understand, well, why are all these people giving babies away? Aren't their families helping them or taking care of them? So for 2 years, I sat in this group and heard all this about rejection. I heard birth mothers say, well, I'm afraid I'm going to get rejected. And I heard adoptees say, I'm afraid I'm going to get rejected. But I never heard anyone say, well, maybe I want to reject them when I find them. No one ever talked about that issue. And I think still people don't bring that issue up because they don't realize it's a good possibility. The next question I think is important is, am I prepared to make a commitment to give this new relationship a chance? I think as responsible adults, we have to take the responsibility to make a commitment. I'm not saying for a lifetime relationship, but to give that new relationship a chance to find out if it's going to go somewhere, if we can live with it, or if it's going to be a rejection. I think, as in any relationship, when you first meet someone, you don't know them. Just because it's your mother or father or brother or sister, you don't know who these people are. You know, and you can't just make that decision and say, oh my, you know, I did it with my birth mother. You know, I wanted so much to be like someone, and she was the first person I met, and you know, when I met her, I thought, okay, I got prepared. She came in from Arizona, I met her in Chicago, and I was so excited, you know, for a couple weeks after I found out we were going to meet, and I thought, now when I see this woman, I'm just going to be overwhelmed that this is my mother. And I got out of the car, and I stood there, and she's in tears and hugging and kissing me, and I just stood there and didn't feel a thing. And it scared me, and I thought, my God, something's wrong with me, or this isn't my mother, you know, because I don't look like her. She looks nothing like me. From what I see so far, and I was being judgmental, I don't act like her. I've made a mistake, and this isn't my mother. And I thought, you know, I was supposed to feel something. And, you know, my professional mind just was completely gone. I mean, here I was, this adoptee, fearful, and, you know, I mean, any education I had played no part in this at all. And I thought, something's wrong with me, I have to get help, you know. And then I thought, wait a minute, I'm a professional, you know, I can help myself here. And I thought, okay, what's the problem here? Well, then it dawned on me, well, okay, she gave birth to me, she carried me 9 months, she said she took care of me for 7 days after I was born. She knows me, I don't know her, you know. Maybe that's what was missing. For her, it was a reunion. It was someone she saw, she had, and this was a reunion. For me, it wasn't, because I don't remember seeing her. So I had to look at it that way. And I think that's what made me come to this conclusion, because I was so upset that I didn't look like this woman or act like her, and I wanted to. I found that my father had died a year before I started my search. So I thought, well, okay, if I don't look and act like her, I must look and act like my father, and that was devastating to me, because the man was dead and I'd never know it. So I think we have to make that commitment to give that person a chance, even though we might look at them and say, I don't really like this person, or I don't like her personality or his personality. We have to be responsible adults and decide, okay, I'm going to give it a year, and if it works, it works, or 2 years or 6 months, or whatever you're comfortable with. The next thing I think you need to ask yourself are, what are my expectations? And if you have, if when you ask yourself that question, you can answer it, then I think you better not search right then. Because if you have expectations, you can only fail at your search. If you don't have expectations, then no matter what you find, it's better than what you didn't have before. If you go in there expecting your mother to be something that you had a fantasy about, and you find a poor scrub woman, you know, who worked in this professional life, and you're a professional and think, well, your mother's going to be like that, you know, you must get it from her, you're going to be nothing but disappointed, and you're going to automatically make that judgment that you don't like this woman. So I think that you have to ask yourself, what do I expect? And if you can write answers to it, then you have to go back and wait until you can tell yourself that you're going to go into this without those expectations. And it's a very hard thing to do, go into it without expecting something. But you can also expect a relationship. These are people you never knew before. When you make a friendship, it's not automatic in most cases, or a relationship with a man or woman. It's not automatic. It takes some time to nourish and grow. And it's the same thing when we find a birth family. The next thing I think you need to ask yourself is, what do I want from this search? And that goes along with expectations. But I separated it because I think that you can separate this, and you can answer mostly what are you looking for. Do I want a relationship? Will I be willing to have a relationship if they want one with me? So you need to separate those two issues. I think you have to be prepared and you have to be ready to work at your own pace. No one can tell you it's time for you to search, and I'm as guilty as doing that as everyone else, and you would think I wouldn't be, but I have a friend who, just talks about it for years and years and years. I'm so sick of hearing it, and she doesn't do anything, and so I push at her, okay, let's search, come on, I'll help you, I'll do it with you, and I know it's wrong, and then I think to myself, now, if someone had done that to me, I would have probably slapped them, or told them to jump in the lake, or get out of my life, but I think it is aggravating to you when you have completed a search and you're so excited in your search that you want others to experience that. I think that's just a normal part of being a searcher. But I think you have to be prepared to work at your own pace, and I think it's very important to get in a search and support group. Even if you do what I did and sit there for 2 years and do nothing but listen to people, and I hardly ever talked, if you can believe that. For that 2 years. I mean, I was just so amazed, and now I have good friends. Okay, those of you who know me, keep your comments to yourself. Now I have friends who are birth mothers, and I never had a friend that was a birth mother. And in fact, when I first called my birth mother, the first thing she said to me was, I know you hate me, I know you're mad at me, I know you don't understand. And I said, no, no, and no. And she said, what? And I said, I don't hate you, I'm not mad at you, I'm not angry. I said, I might be later if I find some things out that maybe I haven't dealt with. But I said, no, I don't feel any of those things. And she could not understand that. And I explained to her that I'd been in this search and support group, and I said, if I hadn't heard it all by now, after 2 years, I don't think I'm going to hear it, which of course I found out isn't true. So it did help, and I think that's a very important part, and I encourage everyone to get in a search and support group, and I encourage you to stay in it even after you complete your search. And this kind of touches on what I said about talking a little bit about post-reunion relationships, because you don't know what's going to be of that relationship in a month or a year or 3 years or 5 years, and it does change. My reunion has been 3 years now. It was on Mother's Day, and it has changed a lot. It's changed with some of my brothers and sisters. Some of them it's not as good as it was, or both of us have found out, well, we're not really that much alike, and I think that's normal. It's normal in regular families. You're not close to every brother and sister, and there are a couple of my brothers that I'm extremely close with. So I think you need to stay in a group for that reason, and if you're going to search or you know someone that's going to, I would really push that issue, because I think that's one of the most important parts about deciding to search. I don't think that we necessarily search for a new family, and I think this is an issue with adoptive parents a lot, and now that I'm an adoptive parent, of course, I can see that more, and I can understand more of maybe how my parents have felt all their lives, and I never understood it before. But I think it's important for us to let people know that we're not necessarily looking for a new family, we're looking for extensions of ourselves. When I did this TV show last week, I played it for my parents when they came over, and we don't talk a lot about the feelings involved in adoption, although we are very close. And my mother is not an emotional person, and it has to do with something that happened in her childhood. But I have never seen my mother cry. As close and as loving and as warm of a person she is, and you probably find that hard to believe, I never in my life saw her cry. And they watched the tape. Of course, my father's just the opposite. You can just look at him and he'll cry. So, my mother sat there, and when the tape was over, and I kept trying to look at them at certain issues I was making in this TV interview, and when it was all over with, I looked at my mother, and she was wiping her eyes, and that really hit me, because I never in my life saw that. And I said, Mom, what's the matter? And she said, I guess I never knew you had all those feelings, and that was such a big thing in an adopted person's life, that all these feelings, that you, how important it is that you know who you look like and who you act like. And it's funny, because my one brother that lives here in town that I'm very close to, that we seem to share the same genetic pool, and if I were a man, I look at him and I think, well, this is who I would be if I were a man, and he feels the same way when he looks at me. Professionally, we're not the same, but our goals and a lot of our achievements are exactly the same. Our views are the same, what we like and dislike. It's just amazing. I think if he wasn't 7 years younger than me, we'd be twins. And my parents took to him immediately, and I thought, well, at first I thought, well, why are they doing that? As much as I wanted them to like my birth family, and then it dawned on me, well, he's exactly like me. They have to like him if they like me. And he calls them Mom and Dad, and they call him their son, and they're very close. And when I look at it now, it's a very good feeling to me, and I do like that. And he teases me, he says, well, you're not the baby anymore. And I said, I'm glad, because now you can take care of them in their old age, not me. And you know. And he says, okay, I will, you know, so, and I honestly think he probably will, too. And it's fine, you know, I think growing up the baby of the family and then finding out you're not the baby of the family is a big letdown, because as the baby, of course, you're spoiled rotten, and, you know, you're put up on this pedestal. And so he teases me, and he says, you're just jealous, and, you know, mom and dad this and mom and dad that. And I said, they're not your mom and dad. He said, well, technically, they're not yours either, you know, if you want to get real technical. And you're just jealous because I'm the baby now. And I said, no, it's fine with me. It honestly is. And, you know, I think I can honestly look at our lives now and say it's okay that they feel that way about him, because I feel like this big weight's been lifted off me, you know, like I don't have to worry about them as much as I used to. They have more kids now to worry about them. So, I think it's real important that we talk with our adoptive parents and that we make them understand. When I saw my mother's reaction, I thought, you know, what a fool I've been these past 3 years, and even before that I couldn't sit down and tell them, I feel like this. And, of course, I was one of those who was very loyal and thought, oh, you know, I can't hurt them and this and that. And I felt when I saw the tears coming down her face, I thought, you know, I could have told her that. We're very close. We talk about everything. And maybe if I had told them that some time ago, they could have understood more when I had problems in my life and when I was depressed or when I felt like I didn't fit in anywhere. So I think it's real important to work with our adoptive families when we search. And I think one of the most important things is to make them understand that we're looking for an extension of us, not for another family. I think we have to be honest with ourselves, and I'm not going to go into that again because we talked about that. I want to push that because I think it's very important that the lies stop with us. I think we're the most guilty and I feel like I can say that as an adoptee because I'm talking about myself, that if we can't stop the lies, how can we expect the others to stop the lies? I think before we begin the search, we have to look at all the risks. We have to look at all the good things that can come of it, and that we have to understand that it's far better to know than not to know, and that truth is much better than fantasy. And I think those are the big things that we can expect to find, that although we find negative things or bad things, that what we find, at least we can get on with our lives. And even though we find negative things, and no one finds all good things, and this is why I say that it's important to stay in a group, because after 3 years, all of a sudden I'm feeling things that I never felt 3 years ago that are very negative. And I've gone through a lot of depression over my birth family and thinking, you know, that I have similarities of those that I don't like those similarities, and I don't want them. And you know, I think all of a sudden you're forced to look at yourself. And when I look at them, I'm seeing me for the first time. And there are some things I don't like to see, and I have to be honest with myself and say, well, I'm just like that too. And if I've seen it in them and I don't like it, and I'm just like them, then I have to deal with that part of me that's negative. And so I think that even though we worth and a sense of self that we can go on and deal with anything that comes our way. And I think the big thing is that you can all of a sudden look at the problems in your life and you're able to separate the adoption issues from the non-adoption issues. And I think that a lot of us tend to blame everything on adoption. Or I know among ourselves, you know, it's a big joke that we say, well, you know, you have the right to be that way because you're an adoptee. You know, we're all crazy. You know, what can you say? You know, or you're a birth mother or a birth father or whatever. And although we joke about it, I think it's very real, because there are problems in our lives and we tend to blame everything on adoption, and it's not all adoption. And so at least when you find, no matter what it is you find, you can finally separate those issues and put them where they belong. Thank you.
What is the big problem you have with calling, with the way you keep drawing a line of distinction between this being a new family? I mean, when you get married, you take in your husband's family as a new family. For me, I didn't love them the same as my parents, but I loved them as a new family. I mean, to me, that just hurts to hear that a lot. Why is it impossible to develop a family-type relationship?
I don't think I was saying that so much as I think you can develop a family relationship. When I look at my, especially the brothers and sisters I'm close to, I don't think of them as anything but my brothers and sisters. And if you see us together, you would be amazed that we didn't grow up together. That's how much alike we are. I don't think it's so much that. I think when you marry, that you're expected to take this family. I think through adoption, it's a completely different issue. There are so many feelings of anger and rejection and surrounding relinquishment that I think you can't look at it the same as in-laws. Your in-laws didn't reject you. Well, some do. I would like to reject mine. Is this on tape?
As a birth mother, I'd like to say I didn't reject
Erase that
either.
part, Becky. I think it's expected. Society expects you to marry someone and that's your new family. But you have to look at the issues of adoption here. And there are so many unresolved, if you talk about the unresolved grief and loss, there's so much there for not only the birth parent but the adoptee. That's the issue you have to look at. And I think that's why it's harder and why it takes so much work. We're going to have a question and answer period after, so I want to go ahead and let Becky get her chance in here. And then we'll have questions and answers after.
My name is Becky Patras. I'm a birth mother. I'm a wife and mother of 5, ranging from 18 to 26. The issues covered in this portion are relative to search, reunion, and post-reunion, touching on members of the triad with primary focus on the birth parent. This workshop will not touch on methods of search, which vary from group to group and state to state. A few statistics briefly. The American Adoption Congress states that in 1989, 700,000 are listed as being in the process of search, according to their records alone. Some figures from the American Orthopsychiatric Association Journal reveal that in 1969, 80% of the out-of-wedlock mothers placed their children for adoption. Yet in 1983, the figure dropped to 4%. The decline reflected a trend of less moralistic views of premarital sex, a high rate of divorce, making single motherhood, fairly common, and granting them rights to raise their children. Social services and income maintenance programs, in addition, made this easier. The post-1983 statistics, however, reveal that anti-abortion rulings and federal cutbacks are currently responsible, again, for the increase in adoption placement. A birth mother seldom needs a reason to search. She knows what she feels, she has suffered the loss, and has a reservoir of love on hold waiting to be released. The only factor that stands in the way seems to be assessing the right time and gathering the courage. The intense need to see and communicate with the child generally is sufficient motivation to begin search. Searching is a highly personal and individualized matter, though. Some birth parents wait and hope that their children will seek them out. Some register with reunion registries to make themselves easily found. Some do not want to interfere with the child's life. Some fear rejection. Some may feel ashamed of their circumstances. Some may fear finding an ill or abused child. And a small percentage want nothing to do with their children. Reunions are only the beginning. The reality quickly becomes evident, and the fantasy no longer needs to or can exist. Very quickly, feelings once suppressed rise quickly to the surface, are relived, and perhaps not entirely understood or even completely welcomed. Around the country, independent speakers and support groups host workshops for birth mothers on healing themselves. A workshop such as this can be useful at any time, even vital. I found it to be a profitable experience even after my search, but somehow felt how helpful it could be used during the waiting and sorting out period of search. A search and support group was there all the way for me, and when my search assistant caringly advised, I listened. It is my belief that this had a great deal to do with the outcome and ongoing meaningful relationship that has been established. It's hard to pull back and wait, to let go. When the objective is forming a relationship of this kind, it's often long-term gain and not impulsivity. The urge really seems to be, oh, I've got to find that child so fast, and the names in the telephone book and the whole scenario that you go through, you just can't get there fast enough. But if you can hang on and turn around and say, what is my main objective? I mean, how I want a productive reunion. I don't want to do anything to get in the way of having it come out positively for me. As search begins, the birth parent easily becomes obsessed with his or her thoughts of the past, the present, and the future. Nothing becomes more important than finding. She may try to do the best for her household, but the child separated by adoption consumes her waking and sleeping hours. The child remains the focal point for some time to come. The preoccupation comes from no longer having to suppress anything. I'd like to read a poem from a book called Perspectives on a Grafted Tree. The poem is entitled Stifled Love by a birth mother from Fort Wayne, Indiana. It reads, I never saw you. Oh yes, once at a distance, a small dark head barely peeking from beneath a yellow blanket. It was best this way. I loved you and I still do, but I can't let that love in my life. I gave you life so your mother could love you. I signed papers that said I was abandoning you, but with love. With knowledge that a family waited for you, waited with joyous outstretched arms. I've seen the joy of families with special babies like you. It is matchless. I've no regrets. You are loved, you are cherished. Be a good son. Love your mother as my children love me. Show her she's special. Show her love. Thank her for me for loving you, for giving you a place to grow. I will always love you, but she is your mother. Just as we recognize years in retrospect that the decision to relinquish affected many people, the decision to search affects those immediately around us, our spouses and our children as well as the newly revealed triad members. A spouse may feel neglected, even ignored. He may be vocal or silent, harboring feelings he is unable to communicate. Sibling reactions may relate to the adoptee or may bring out already existing conflict situations. For example, the oldest child has cherished the status common to the firstborn, only to realize he has in reality become displaced. Other children may suffer in ways not easily discernible to either parent. Jealousies can be expected, as well as plain old comfortable acceptance. Family members need to understand the feelings of the adoptee. This can be done through support groups as well as within the family unit. Frustrations and uncertainty abound. In Rod McEwen's book entitled Finding My Father, he writes, some people run from me. Some people flee from me. Some people see me in only themselves. Others there are who are bent on believing me, only the way that they want me to be. If I knew why I was, who it is that I am, or who I ought to be, I'd be a kinder man. But as it is, I'm all things to everyone, ending up being nothing to anyone. Even to me, I'm less than I want to be. More of myself has been lost as I've grown. Who was I anyway? Nothing in any way that would resemble a semblance of own. Help me. I need to be helped into being me. I can't stand alone. Some distance away, an adoptive family is or is not aware of a reunion or a projected one. They may be uncertain, fearful, or perhaps ached with the best of intentions. Inside a voice says, what will happen now? The gamut of feelings varies from one adoptive family to another. Another adoptive family may be angry, possessive, and guilt-tripping. Will the new relationship with the birth parent be positive for our child? And can we all just exist comfortably, nobody losing, everybody gaining? Perhaps with their acceptance and understanding, their ability to feel happiness for the child, the adoptee can have it all. Another selection from Perspectives on a Grafted Tree is entitled Adoptive Father by Bill Thompson. By the way, some of the reasons that I've taken these excerpts are to illustrate feelings felt by those various members of the triad, because it's feelings that we're really talking about here. Everybody's feelings, not just the searcher or the person sought after or the extended member of the triad. Everyone's got feelings. That triangle is equidistant on all sides. I had to be approved to be a father, while other men didn't have to bother. I had to answer questions about my life. They asked all about me and my wife. They wanted to know if we were wild or if we were fit to raise a child. I had to bare my very soul and explain my every goal. They don't understand what I went through because it was something they didn't have to do. Most men never have to bother, but I needed approval to be a father. Everyone needs to be able to give love without having to explain it, define it, or describe it. The adoptee is the focus of that love and needs to be. In a way, that's how it begun. A relinquishment born out of love for the child. An adoption we hoped would give love to the child. And a reunion we pray will restore a mother's love and trust to a child. Briefly, I would like to share my story with you. 13 years ago, I ventured into the world of search. I was frightened by the whole process and withdrew. 2 years ago, I began again, made minimal headway. 14 months ago, I started and completed my search, and with monumental support through Truth Seekers and Adoption, where I also found some extraordinary friends. June 19th, 1989, the search was completed and the connection made. At 4:02 p.m., the phone rang, the voice of a 26-year-old young man full of emotion, extending his hand to a birth mother filled with longing, wanting to love him unconditionally. 1 month later, an abbreviated reunion took place here that connected all except the husband of the birth mother. The impact of that reunion and the ongoing relationship on me has created a happiness inside that would be hard to describe except to another birth mother. I wrote the following collection of feelings to him this Mother's Day, and when he called, I read them to him. This Mother's Day is a blessing of peace, to know that my oldest son was in your hands. For all his life being loved by another mother, I lived those years with hope and faith, never believing I'd be privileged to see a young man years ago born to me. I could not have given him all I felt in my heart, but now at last I've been able to impart the hurt I felt, the happiness I now feel. Seeing him smile, seeing the years having treated him well, knowing his future will bring hopefully peace and joy, many challenges and experiences to unfold. I've been blessed, and it's been told. The relationship has been full of sharing and giving. Letters and phone calls are exchanged, back off is periodical, sensitivity is present. My life feels complete, and I now can say I have 5 children. He expresses being happy to be found, but admits readily that he would have not chosen to search. He married 12 days after being found. During the post-reunion time, he has made changes in his life that have been meaningful to him and to me. There has been no contact between adoptive and birth parents. He is not ready for this, and it is my desire to respect his feelings. They convey through him that they are grateful to me for the joy they've had and that they are happy for him. Someday I look forward to sharing my feelings with them. The impact of search on my spouse and children is as follows. My husband, who had known about my son prior to our marriage, was supportive of my search until the end of my search. Just prior to reunion, he announced plans of a business trip which would take him out of town. He began expressing anger, jealousy, and fear, and 11 months later is periodically quite angry. The siblings have known for many years of the existence of their brother. The oldest daughter, who cherished her status, was upset, displaced, but fascinated by her older brother. The twins, both girls, had split reactions. One was terribly excited, the other wary and protective of me, fearing a possible rejection. 10 days prior to the reunion, our youngest son was hospitalized for being suicidally disposed. It is necessary to clarify that the reunion was not responsible for this episode. The hospitalization was due to unresolved grief. We visited him in the hospital, and he came out of the door to the unit and took a look at his older brother and said, "Oh, my God, you look just like my mother." My son was in college during his brother's latest visit. He looks forward to a relationship but expresses a need for it to be on his own time and without any pressure. In conclusion, I would like to say doing this workshop has given me still a better understanding of the triad, including my own role. Mutual understanding within the triad is vital. There are many feelings of sadness, inadequacy, and loss shared by members. Whether a birth mother or an adoptee, Search is a decision, and it needs to be a comfortable one. Reunion is the beginning, and as you heard from Grace, responsibility needs to be taken by the searcher and others involved in the nurturing relationship, being willing to be patient in order to fulfill the dream of establishing a solid bond that hopefully will help dim those memories of endless, painful years of separation. Thank you. We'd like to open it up if you have some questions or comments or want to discuss anything that in particular that we talked about. We'd like to do that now.
I'm a birth parent, and I had a reunion with my daughter a year ago, January, and you were saying how when you met your birth mother that she was all huggy and everything. And I had a wonderful reunion with my birth daughter, and I left it. I don't know if I'm working on avoidance of rejection or denial, but I left her with a non-obligation. And I mean, I know in my heart someday we will have a relationship. She was 18 when I first met her, so it was new. And I knew the only way I gave her up was resolving that I would find her, and that's the only way I could give her up. So I knew for 18 years I was going to find her. And I told her that, and I said that it was okay, that she just, as long as she didn't hang up on me when I called once in a while and didn't send my letters back unopened, that I expected nothing else from her. And I guess I have a problem with it because all my friends and family say, well, gee, have you heard from Rachel? And it's like, no, I don't expect to. And I truly think I believe that. And sometimes I wonder when I hear it, am I being too considerate, or do I just sit back and wait?
Well, I think that, even after the search, we still have expectations. Like I was saying, you shouldn't have them before the search, and we still have them after the search. For me, I was just asked this at a wake for a birth relative that I went to Tuesday and Wednesday, and asked, well, have you heard from your mom? And I haven't heard from her for a long time. I haven't talked to her for a year, and the letters I've received have been cards either for the baby or Christmas or very non-committal things. And so, when I was asked Tuesday at the wake, well, what do you hear from your mom? And I thought, well, I should be very honest and say, I haven't heard anything from her, and I knew that they would not understand that. And so I said, well, I haven't talked to her recently, and it conveniently got me out of it, but it did bother me. And I thought, there should be more to this, and I don't think I still feel the way I did on the initial meeting, and I mean, when I stood there, I did stand like this, and, these arms and tears were around me, and I was like this, and it just, I was with this awe, I just didn't understand why I was supposed to feel something. And, but I guess it depends on what's going on with that relationship, how your daughter feels about, did you find her?
I found
Okay.
her.
I guess it would depend on how she feels about that, if she's resolved her anger or how she feels about her adoption. There's a lot of what-ifs involved in it, that if you don't have a relationship where you can ask her to talk to you about those things, I think it makes it harder, which is the case with me and my birth mother. With my brother that I'm so close to, when there is a problem and we both realize it, we both confront each other. And it's so much easier. It's harder, but it's easier. With my birth mother, it's a denial thing. I think she thinks that if she sends me a nice card every now and then, we never have to deal with any of this. And it's true, we don't. But we both suffer for it.
Yeah.
So I guess it's so individualized. Maybe Becky has an answer for you. It's so individualized that I think that if you have a kind of relationship with her, that maybe you can start initiating some dialogue with her on the feelings, or trying to resolve some of her feelings. Maybe she has no one to share this with.
We have 3,000 miles.
Yeah, see, that's our
So do
problem.
That's
So do
the
we.
obstacle, and she is still living at home. So I'm reluctant to call. The last time I called was to try to get her for her birthday, and I missed her, and it was the first time. Her dad and I seemed to get along okay. And yet, I don't know if it's just latent paranoia set upsetting
Yeah.
and all of that.
I think it changes us so much, you know. I'm a very outward person. I mean, people know if I like them or I don't. That's how obvious it is. You know, and some of you are going on that other list, so you know who you are, too. And Jane, you're on there, too, so quit looking like that. But, you know, for me, all of a sudden I became this very timid, introvert person, and that wasn't like me at all, and I thought, you know, something's really wrong here. I mean, I'm letting this person take control of me and intimidate me so much, and I'm so afraid to rock the boat, but yet I'm the kind of person that when I feel something, I let you know how I feel. You know, and it was so foreign to me not to be able to do that with her. And so finally, about a year ago, and as I said, my reunion's been 3 years, it just got to me to such a point that I decided, well, if I can't dialogue with her in person, which was pretty impossible, I've really only seen her twice. Because of the distance, and it's been like once a year, and so this is the 3rd year I haven't seen her, and I don't think I'm going to. So that made it hard, and I thought, well, if I can't dialogue with her in person, and I can't do it on the phone because she's in such a state of denial that no matter what I bring up or say, you know, it's just passed right over. So I thought, well, the next thing is to write the letter, you know, and I thought, okay, and I do pretty good with the letters, so I sat down. It ended up being a 12-page legal pad letter on both sides. So we're talking about like 24 pages here. And I thought, okay, this is going to really bomb her out, you know. I mean, I didn't hear from her for 6 months. I mean, she was so overwhelmed. And I told her, you know, I just don't have time. I want to make this commitment, but I don't have time for this to be such a disruption in my life that it's making me sick, it's making me nervous, and I'm not this kind of person. I don't have a nervous problem, and all of a sudden I did. And I said, I can't live like this. You know, I have too many other things and other people in my life that I can't take this disruption. And I know that was very hard for her to have to look at. You know, and I left it up to her, and I said, this is what I want. And if you feel you can give me this, fine. And if you feel you don't, that doesn't mean I don't want you in my life. We'll work around it, but you have to tell me what you want. So I think if you can't get together, and maybe don't write a letter like I did, but there were a lot of other things that were involved in my letter writing. There were a lot of lies that were going on. You know, when I first met her, she told me how happy she was. She wanted all the pictures and everything, and I had an album that was already made, and I kind of added to it from my birth through college and marriage and everything. And she thought it was so wonderful, but it upset her to see the kind of family I did, you know, that I had everything. And she said, although it made her feel so good to know I went to such a good family and had such a good life, she knew she could never compete with that the rest of my life. And she can't. But no one expects her to, and she doesn't realize that. You know, just like no one can compete with her being my mother, you know? And so I think that honesty has to come in there. And like I said, for us, there was more to it because she felt these things. There were lies that started that kept coming back to me, and this was upsetting me. You know, things I'd hear through other brothers and sisters, and that she'd say, well, Grace expects this of me. And there were things I never even said to her, you know, and things that were so far-fetched. You know, like, Grace wants a relationship right now and told me I have to make up for 33 years. You know, and that just amazed me. And so I had to look beyond it. Like I said, I had to look beyond those hurt feelings and think, this is how she feels. I didn't say those things to her, but her guilt is so great that she feels she has to make up for 33 years. And so I think a letter, you know, is the only thing to do, because it forces a person to read, to look at it, and maybe see beyond their own anger and hurt.
Yeah, it's funny because it's almost like the opposite end of the spectrum of where you're at. Where I'd like to be able to say to her that I'd like a little bit more activity in the relationship, just, you know, a little bit. But I know that the whole thing was overwhelming for her. She had no, you know, when we were talking, she said she had no regrets about being adopted. She knew that she was loved, and that's why she was given up.
Yeah.
I mean, she said everything that I could have hoped for.
Were her adoptive parents supportive?
Pretty much, yeah. When I called her up, and then I called her a few days later to see how it went, because she was going to go home from work and tell them. She said, you know, she went home, she said she was crying, and she talked to her mother, and her mother started crying,
Yeah.
and then her father. And they all sat there
Yeah.
crying and saying how wonderful it
Because
was.
see, I think there's a lot of things that we don't look at or we're not prepared for, even those of us who do the search as adoptees. And as a birth mother, I think it's even harder when you initiate the search. And we talked a little bit about this in another workshop yesterday, where, you know, as adoptees doing a search, search, not even adoptees doing a search, but just as adoptees, we've lived with this all our lives as an open thing, pretty much, for the majority of cases, where birth parents have had to live with it as a secret, not tell anybody they never had this baby, and they were told to forget it. So it's such a completely different thing that then when we come together, it's still different, and it's hard to understand. And I think it's harder when a birth parent, for an adoptee, when a birth parent does the searching, because the adoptee maybe wasn't at a stage to do a search, or maybe things were going on in their lives or with their adoptive parents. And although I'm not saying that you as birth parents don't have people to prepare, I think adoptees have, the adoptive parents is such a big issue, and it takes such careful preparation, and it still may change. When I did my search, my father, when this doctor called them into my room and said, what kind of, and I was baffled that this doctor did this. I couldn't believe that they were talking to my parents this way. And he said, what kind of parents are you that you let this woman live all her years like this? What kind of parents could you have been? And my parents stood there and went, what? And I think it shocked them into this reality, and I was ready to beat the doctor. You can't talk to them that way, and because we have that loyalty, and we're told all our lives we're that chosen child, and we're special, and we're this and we're that, and it puts us up on that pedestal where we have to take care of these people, and we love them and we want to take care of them, but it's still a little different than when you're born to them. And you want to protect them from all these things in society that are making them different. And my father was very supportive during my search. He wanted to go to court, he wanted to hire lawyers, and I didn't want to do that. My mother was very non-committal. She didn't say no, but all my life she said, whenever you want to know, I'll let you know. Well, when it was time, she hid the papers. You couldn't find the papers, and it was amazing because that just wasn't like her. When I completed my search and I called and I said, I found my birth mother, my father didn't talk to me for 3 weeks. And my mother, oh great, we're going on Donahue, we're going on Oprah Winfrey, and I'm going, wait a minute. What? I called the wrong number. And and it was exactly like that. And I didn't understand that. What happened to my father, who was pushing this all along? And when I finally told my father, he said, why haven't you found them yet? I said, Mom won't give me the papers. And he, and they don't yell at each other, and he really let into her about these papers. And he said, where are those papers? Why are you doing this? And, my mother would never say anything, but she finally gave them reluctantly. And when the switch came, it was so confusing to me, that I thought, now what am I supposed to do? And so, after 3 weeks of this, it was killing me with my dad. And my mom finally told me that what was upsetting him was that he was prepared for me to find them. He knew I was involved in the movement, although he didn't know he never understood how extensive my involvement is. By the way, I'm making them come tonight. He keeps calling me every day. They live about 100 miles from here. And he keeps calling me saying, do I really have to come to this? And who's going to be there exactly? I said, birth mother's dad. He went, so he called me last night, left a message on my machine. I didn't get home till midnight. And he said, call me first thing in the morning before you go to that thing. And so I called him this morning. He said, oh, and then he said, by the way, I love you. And on the machine, I thought, okay, he's going to come up with some excuse. And I called him this morning. He said, do I really have to come to this thing? And I said, yes, Dad, you do. And he said, well, what am I going to do there? What are they going to do to me? And I said, they're not going to do anything to you. And he said, well, then why do I have to be there? I said, because it's important to me for you to see what I'm involved in. I said, this is a part of my life. I'm a regional director. I said, I'm involved. I'm on the board now. I said, this is what I do. And I said, just like you've been a part of my professional life, you brag to people. Well, I never thought I'd see my parents bragging. My daughter's on TV talking about adoption issues again, And my dad said, do you have copies of that tape I can take on vacation with us? And it just really, it was so good for me, that he's coming to terms with this. He's still not too sure about birth mothers, He still doesn't understand it completely, and it really worries him what anybody's going to do to him here tonight, and I said, it's just important to me. But, I'm getting a little off the track. It's such an issue with us that you don't know what maybe she's feeling with her adoptive parents, or if they've been supportive, maybe now they're pulling back on that. Mine pulled back and now they're really involved in it, They're proud that I'm doing this, and I never thought that would happen. I thought, well, they're going to come to accept that I'm in adoption reform, but they're never going to brag to anybody, And they're very proud that I'm doing this now, that I have an issue that's so important to me. And, So you have to really look at what's going on in her life, and you have to try to understand it from an adoptee's
Yeah.
side. And I know that's hard to
It's
do.
with and especially since I don't want to go back on my promise to her, and it was that, my letters would contain no questions.
Mhm.
I don't want to put any obligation on her. When I call the house and I miss her, I don't say, I just say, let her know I called, but I don't say, please have her call me. Because it was a big relief for her when I did say that, and I was glad to see it was a relief, because I could tell we had a very overwhelming week. I mean, it was even overwhelming. for
How
me.
long ago was your reunion?
A little over a year in January, and I am going back east in July, so.
And see, I almost think it's harder when there is that distance, because it's there and then it's not there. When I met my birth mother, it was like, for 2 weeks it was constant. I took time off. I came up to the city because I was living downstate then. And it was, I mean, she was dragging me everywhere to meet these people, which is a very big mistake to do. And I was just so overwhelmed and so confused, and I just wanted to get to know her. And another problem was she down-talked my birth father so much. And everybody around me, my brothers and sisters, said, oh my gosh, you're just like Dad. And that upset me so much to know I'd never know this person, and that I'd searched all this time to find who I was like, and he was dead. And then, we'd be together, and a brother or sister would say, Dad used to say that same comment about things, and nobody in the family says that but you. And then to listen to my birth mother, all she did was talk bad about him and what a rotten person he was. And I thought, well, if I'm that much like him, she must not like me too much either. And I think that is an issue for her. I am just like my father, from what I'm told. So it must be very hard, right, And so there's so many issues, and like I said, when there's a distance like that, I think it is so much harder, because you can't just call up or you can't just go over or say, hey, why don't you meet me halfway, or...
Let's go to dinner.
Yeah. And I think it would be easier. I think it's easier on adoptees and birth parents who have that availability to them to build a relationship and not see each other but once a year.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to our visit, no matter what.
Yeah.
Like I say, when I do talk to her when she is home, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And I don't have this person on the phone, well, what do you want?
Yeah.
It's,
It used-
wow, it's you. Hi, how
Yeah,
are
it
you?
used to bother me because I thought, gosh, I'm going on 3 years here, or I've just had 3 years, and we're really no further down the road than, a little bit and then a little bit back. And then I think, and everybody else, I see having relationships, it's so much more advanced. But then I have to think, well, you have to look at that mileage distance, and you have to kind of put that in perspective and say, well, if that person was closer, maybe we'd get through all these anger and resentment and whatever, and hash it out with each other and get on with the rest of it. Or maybe we, have a more loving relationship. We'd get to know each other. It's hard to get to know someone when there's that many miles between you. And you are going to try to be on your best with that person. It took me a long time to not primp, and I'm not a primper, before I go meet my brothers all the time. It took me like 2 years before I quit doing that. Now I could care less what I look like when they go, I'm just, it's just them, and if they don't like it, tough, But I'm sure if I was going to meet my birth mother, she was coming in, I would primp, because I don't know her. And so you have to get through that stage, I think, before anything really starts to develop. And it's a lot harder when it's long distance.
But it's okay for me to sit back and wait.
Oh, I don't think there's anything, yeah.
I don't want to push her.
What I can offer you is, even though my length of time post-reunion is very similar to yours, my son did back off. And as difficult or nearly as impossible as it was for me to sit on my hands, I sat on those hands, and I didn't even send a letter, no phone call, nothing. And when he came back of his own volition, because he had waited out his feelings and gotten used to what he was feeling, and if he was overwhelmed, he dealt with it, and when he came back, he was ready to communicate. And he's backed off several times. In fact, I think that's what's happening right now. And it's better and better the more you let that happen.
Yeah, and that's, usually I push for people to like me, and I'm doing just the opposite. I'm not pushing.
I think as it goes on, you have more of a right, if it starts to bother you, to say,
Right.
I need more out of
I think
this.
and it hasn't really been an issue you know, but coming here, everything gets to come to the
Yeah.
surface again, and you get to talk to
Yeah.
her. And all of a sudden, you know, I have this yearning to see her and talk to her and just, you know, get that
Yeah.
hug that she gave me as soon as
Yeah.
she met me.
I do that. I
will
get
never
fired
go
up.
away.
You know, I get fired up every year at a conference, and I think, okay, now I'm going to go and confront her, and we're going to get this hashed out. And
My family, I'm doing what you say now when they ask if you've heard from your
Yeah.
mother. It's easier to tell them, oh, I haven't had a chance
Yeah.
to, well, I did talk to her a little while ago. It's easier to say that than to hear their disappointment.
Yeah.
Well, why isn't she talking
Yeah.
to you? Especially my dad. My dad is still upset with this whole thing that, did I do something that was illegal? I thought you signed away all your rights and, you know, the whole thing. And so her not communicating with me is just reinforcing his
why don't
attitude.
you pass these around? I think that you have that right, that, you know, if it goes on like that, then you should confront her and say, you know, I need more out of this, or we need to talk about it, and you need to set some ground rules to see where it's going to go.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to July. I'm hoping that a lady I've talked to over the phone has a search group in New York and support group. I'm hoping she has a meeting.
Has your daughter gotten into a search group, see
No,
that, or a
that's
support
what
group?
I want to try and
See, that's,
get her to
see, my
do.
birth mother hasn't either, and there's one right by her, and I think that would help tremendously,
Yeah.
because then she hears some other things.
Yeah, let her know that not from my word, but from other people, that
Yeah.
there's other people that have the same feelings
Yeah.
and they're okay.
Yeah, in fact, she said, well, I am in a support group because her second husband just died recently. I said, that's not the same kind of support group. And she says, oh, it's wonderful, it's done so much for me. And I said, and that's what an adoption support group does. But she doesn't understand why she needs to do that. So until she does, you know, I think this will go on. Someone else here had a...
I was just going to comment, I have a 17-year-old, 15-year-old daughter, and I mean, that rejection or that holding back is a real natural thing for them.
For
So when
that
I look,
age. Yeah, it's for
I mean,
that
I'd like
age.
to hug them too.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't, so.
It's natural at that age.
Right,
Yeah.
and it's a real age appropriate, that they want to be off on their own, and so I think to get another mother all of a sudden could be.
Yeah, and that's what I figured. She doesn't need someone hanging on to her skirt tails.
Right, so,
I mean,
you know.
Yeah.
Even though I'm the mother and she's
That is a hard age. You know, a lot of things are going on in your life.
she's just sprouting her
Yeah,
independence.
I think that's why I didn't care about searching. You know, 18 and in college, first time away from home, you don't care about getting involved with other people. Yeah.
Yeah, who needs a new mother? So I'm hoping, and like I said, in my heart, I know, because I told her that when I saw her the last time, that I said my goodbyes to her and I promised her then that I would find her. And her comment to that was, I think I've always known that. And so that's why, you know, deep in my heart, I know it's okay that I'm sitting back, but I can't get my friends and family to accept this. And then they
Yeah.
get me started to think that, well, will it ever come?
Yeah. I found that with my father especially, you know, like he'd hear my brothers and I make little under-the-table comments about my birth mother and, you know, what was going on. And, of course, he'd pick up on that and go, well, you know, you must have been an awful baby or something, and that's why all this is happening, because he doesn't understand it. Or he'll say, well, why doesn't she talk to you more? Where is she? Or, you know, what's going on? And they've never met each other. And so, and I think that's a little game between them that it's going to have to resolve between them. I'm not doing anything with it. The first year, my parents didn't want to meet her. The second year she was here, she didn't want to meet them, and they wanted to meet her. So, you know, I finally put myself aside. When they both tell me they want to meet, then fine. So, you know, but it is hard for the other people to understand why there's still problems. And, you know, I know my dad's called me the past couple of months, well, I'm worried about you and you're depressed, and who did something to you? Did we do it? Did she do it? You know, who did it? And they don't understand that there's ongoing feelings and problems with it.
Yeah, just knew it, Joe.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Anybody else have a
Anyone have
question?
any questions?
Comment? Okay, well, we want to thank you all for coming, and hope you got out of it what you were looking for.